All right, here we go. Part 2, keeping it kosher. Last week when we met, we defined kosher, what it means to be to keep kosher, and I actually came up with it on the spot. I actually like my definition. Kosher, the definition of keeping kosher, is the absence of not kosher. It's actually profound. It's actually profound. Kosher is the absence of not kosher. We identified, I think we had on my sheet, 12 things at least that that make things not kosher. Probably a whole lot more, but we went through 12 items. Eating kosher just means you're not eating any of these things that aren't kosher. So kosher is sort of a negative or a positive or a lack of a negative or however you want to count that. Okay, so that's what it means to be kosher. We question in the back before. Worcestershire sauce. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the question is well, can we clarify Worcestershire sauce, which I'm mispronouncing? Worcestershire sauce. Yeah, I knew I was going to do that, and that was not on purpose. Worcestershire sauce often has fish in it, and the question is isn't fish neither meat nor dairy? Which, all right, let's bring in another word into our lexicon, another word of jargon. What's when something is not meat nor it's dairy? What's it called? Pariv. What does pariv mean? I don't know. I think it's a Yiddish word. I don't think it actually means that. It's certainly not a Hebrew word. I think it's a Yiddish word. Pariv just means it's neither meat nor milk. Pariv means neutral, I'm guessing. I actually don't know what the literal translation of pariv is. Pariv means it's pariv. I don't know what to tell you. Pariv means it's pariv. It means it's not. And the answer is, the question is isn't fish pariv? The answer is yes. Fish is pariv. It's neither meat nor milk, as we're going to actually talk about a little bit in just a few moments. However, we mentioned last week that there is one of the 12 items of things that are not kosher are dangerous foods. Things that are dangerous, you're not allowed to eat. And we have a tradition that some types of food combinations are actually dangerous. Maybe not so intuitive to us that we think that they're dangerous, but in halacha, they're considered dangerous foods. And one of them is mixing meat and fish. Meat and fish, it's not really a kosher like meat and milk. It's a different thing. It's considered an unhealthy thing to eat. That actually is, whereas kosher, we pointed out, it's not a matter of health. It's a matter of we do what God says. However, meat and fish, we have a tradition. It's not the healthiest thing. Now you'd say, well, come on, we don't see that as a problem nowadays. And indeed, we are much more lenient because it doesn't seem to be much of a health risk nowadays, but we still won't eat it together. Well, we'll be a little bit more lenient, as we'll see later today and probably next week. But that's where it comes from. So you're not supposed to have it. And since a lot of thank you very much for your assist. Worcestershire sauce has fish in it, so they will often put, if it actually has fish in it, they will mention it'll say kosher OU, which one of the certifications, and it'll say fish because you really can't put it. You can't. It'll say it on the bottle, and you can't put it on the. It will say it by the kosher certification because they're telling you don't put that with meat. What do you do with Worcestershire sauce if you're not putting it on meat? What would you use it for? I don't know. I'm not a chef. I eat the food. I could cook a little bit, but I'm not like a chef. But okay. So we mentioned, let's kind of sort of continue where tonight's topic is going to be meat and milk, which is going to be probably the most significant things to talk about when we talk about a kosher home, at least in terms of the background. Just to sort of back ourselves up. Last week we talked about kosher meat, and we identified where I got it over here. I have it on my list over here. When it comes to kosher meat, there are several things you have to make sure are checked off. It has to be from a kosher species animal. It has to be slaughtered appropriately. The animal can't have any injuries. You have to remove the blood, and there are certain forbidden parts of the animal which can't be eaten. So there are at least 5 prohibitions associated with kosher with meat, making sure your meat is kosher. Now, we pointed that out. It's for most of us, this is an academic thing because practically you're not doing any of that. You're not slaughtering animals. You're not draining the blood. You're not doing any of that. What are you doing? You're going to a store and you're buying it. So you could skip all of the, it is important to know. I think it's very helpful to know. You should know what you're doing when you're eating kosher meat. Why is kosher meat hard to find? What's special about kosher meat? It's all these 5 things. Okay. But practically, you just buy it in a store. I want to just stop right there for a second and maybe off to the side. The things we talk about being a kosher consumer, it requires a certain lifestyle change. It requires a certain lifestyle change, what you can and cannot eat. This will be a lifestyle change number 1 and 2. Kosher lifestyle change number 1 is most meat you just can't buy. You can't go to a grocery store and just buy the meat. You have to find kosher meat. Where do you find kosher meat? It's not so easy. You have to really go to a kosher store. It's a specialty item. If you're in Wichita, Kansas, you're gonna have a hard time finding kosher meat. You're gonna have to find a community, even small communities. Hopefully, have ways of getting meat. I remember not so long ago, 10 years when I first moved here to town in 2013, it was not so easy to find kosher meat here. You had Smith's, which it was much smaller back then. But what's that? When they didn't have kosher Smith's, there was Albertsons, there was Trader Joe's had a little bit, and that was basically it. Wow, there was a kosher, but there was a little booth there. You could learn a lot about the Jewish history of any town. And you what was the kosher food? How do you get kosher meat? But the way I used to get kosher meat, and the way honestly how I still do get a lot of my kosher meat is I get it special ordered. There are a bunch of different ways of getting it. We get it shipped from out of state. Have you ever someone puts together something called Casey Kosher Co-op? If you're familiar with that, that's great. So in these deliveries, and it's just a type of thing. It's just when it comes to kosher meat, you just have to plan it in advance. You can't just go anywhere and find it. You have to bring it with you, get it from a specialty store. But you just have to know what you're looking for, and it's not hard. Costco carries some kosher chicken. It has a little bit of meat at Costco. You just know where to find it. It's in the frozen section. You got to know where to get it from. It is findable. You just have to know what you're looking for. So number 1 is you have to know where you're looking for to find kosher meat. Number 2 is it's going to be more expensive. There's no way around it. Think about it. There has to be, kosher species animal, maybe that doesn't add to the price, but shechita has to be slaughtered in a very specific way. It has to make sure that none of the animals were injured, drained of blood, and removed all the forbidden parts of the animal. It's just by nature, it's going to dry. I'm surprised how cheap kosher meat is. It's not that much more expensive. It is significantly more expensive than going to Smith's and just going to the butcher. It's I don't know, 1.8 times the price. It's not maybe double. But even double, if you think about it, just the supply and demand, I actually find it surprising that it's only double the cost. Double, a little bit more. It's not 10 times the cost. Okay, so the chicken is more. It is what it is. It is what it is.
We just moved from New Jersey, and the kosher meat here is almost double the price of New Jersey. I called the butcher from home, and he won't send it for me.
Yeah, it's going to be hard. And it is, and I'm not going to sugarcoat. It will be more expensive. There's no way around it. Supply, demand, it's just a lot more that goes into manufacturing or producing whatever it is, kosher meat. So you got to know where to find it. And it's going to be more prohibited in terms of pricing. So those are items number 1 and 2 when it comes to keeping a kosher lifestyle. So those are the first 5 things we talked about last week. Item number 6 we kind of bumped into, which is, maybe let's talk about this for a moment, is dairy products. Let's talk about dairy for a minute. Cheese, milk, anything that's dairy. Anything that is dairy, let's talk about the kashrus of dairy, the kashrut of dairy. Dairy products need to come from kosher species animals. And certain requirements of that, you can't get, so for example, pig milk is not going to be kosher, right? You have to ensure that, okay, I'm sorry, I realized I skipped one thing. That comes from a kosher species animal. Now, that's not so hard. And that's typically almost all dairy that you find comes from cows. It's like 98%. The other 1.999% is goats. And then there's you have to really try to find camel milk. You have to really try to find non-kosher species animal milk. It's very, very hard. That said, and I realize I want to go back. Let's put the dairy, hold that thought for just a second. Let's go back to meat for a moment. When it comes to meat, we said the cost of meat, that's gonna be some of your lifestyle changes. Getting meat and the cost of meat, right? There's one other thing, item number 3, and this is very important. Anything that you eat that's manufactured, anything that you eat, you have to be sure there's no animal product in it. So if you buy a fruit roll-up, it's just fruit in it, right? Look at the ingredients. It's got deoxyribonucleic, ribose, nucleic. It sounds like a science experiment. You don't know what any of this stuff is. You don't know what they're putting in there. So before we get into the kosher consumer and kosher certification, which will be the topic of the 4th class, roughly speaking, anything that you buy, and this is really what the main part of kosher certification is all about. And again, we're going to have a whole class on the kosher consumer. But what they're doing is they're essentially assuring you that there is no animal product in your fruit roll-up. Well, to be more of that, to be, Rabbi, that's impossible. Yeah, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised what goes into your food. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in class 4 when we talk about kosher certification, what you're looking for and why you're looking for it, and things to be aware of. But products that you buy, you have to ensure that they're kosher. What you're really ensuring is the main thing that you're ensuring is that there's no animal product in it. Okay? For most products, it's actually fairly easy, which is why there's a huge amount of kosher certified products. You go to Smith's, you go to any store in North America, so long that you don't want to buy meat from, you're not looking for meat. But if you're looking for non-meat items, there's a kosher version of almost every food out there. You want Caesar salad dressing, you'll find it. You want, you'll find it. It's you just have to get one that's kosher certified. And what they're doing is they're making sure there are no meat products in there. Okay. Now, the reason why I brought that up right now is, well, it makes sense. Let's go back to dairy. So dairy, if you just buy, let's say, milk. So really, let's stick to milk just for a second. Milk is just good old-fashioned milk. All you need to know is that it comes from a cow, a kosher species animal, and it's not coming from a camel. Now, how do you know it's coming from a cow versus coming from a camel? So, question first, number 1 is, how do you know? Number 2, it happens to be that our sages instituted something called, there's another restriction. You may have heard of a concept called Chalav Yisrael. You ever heard of that? Chalav Yisrael means part of the milking process should be done under the auspices of a Jew. The reason why our sages enacted that is to ensure that the milk that you're drinking is cow milk, not camel milk. Okay? And that actually is a requirement. You need to be sure that the milk was milked by a Jew to ensure that it's indeed from a kosher species animal. If you go to many, many countries, for most of Jewish history, and even today in many, many countries, you actually need to find kosher milk. You can't just assume that the milk is kosher. Okay? This is called Chalav Yisrael, and it actually is the starting point. Now, famous to some of us at least, it was very popular, or it's a well-known tshuva, a response of the great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who we've spoken a lot about, who's the leader of North American Jewry. And he has one of his most groundbreaking tshuvas, one of his most groundbreaking responses, where he argues that the requirement of Chalav Yisrael, when our sages instituted that milk needs to be milked under the auspices of a Jew, it's not really that it needs to be milked under the auspices of a Jew. It has to be. This is way beyond the scope of this conversation. Let me just flag that. He argues if you have another way of being absolutely certain that it's cow's milk, you can rely on that. And he argues based on several proofs and arguments and beyond the scope of this class that nowadays in the United States of America, where you have the FDA, which if any Smiths, any company were to go and put camel milk in their milk, they'd be shut down and put out of business. So they're risking losing their license, number 1. Number 2, it's not even like it's profitable. It's not like there's no incentive to substitute your cow milk with camel milk. There's no incentive for them to do that. So you're allowed to rely on what's called chalav stam. You don't need kosher certified milk. And any milk will do the job. Now, I said it's specifically in the United States of America, because if you go to a third world country, If you go, not even to a third world country, even places like Mexico, I think, or in places where you don't have quite the same regulations like you have in the United States of America, where you have the FDA, and if you break, a law, you're in big, big trouble. So you go to a lot of countries. You just have to know case specific what countries have the same type of standards. But if you go, not even to third world countries, I think it's a lot of Latin American countries, you really need to make sure then your milk actually needs to be certified. But out here in the United States of America, there's a leniency which most people rely on. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's leniency, you could buy any milk. Okay? However, many people are machmir, many people are stringent, and they don't rely on that leniency. And they will only drink chalav Yisrael. They will only drink milk that's been certified. Okay? It's same old milk. It's just comes from a different line, a different run, and that's that. Question. Always true, but it doesn't need one. It does not need kosher certification. If you find milk that happens to have kosher certification, that's great. I want to flag right here, half and half, I believe whipping cream as well, which I don't really use, heavy cream, that does need kosher certification. But specifically for milk, skim, 1%, 2% whole, does not need kosher certification. You're relying on a leniency, but it's a well-accepted leniency. There are those who are stringent and only drink chalav. Now, you can buy chalav Yisrael out here in Vegas. You have to buy it at Smith's. But it's not the easiest thing in the world to find. So you can rely, personally, I do rely. When I was in New York and it was a lot easier, so I would drink only chalav Yisrael, but out here I drink regular milk. Yeah, so I go, but the ones that are kosher certified milk does not mean it's chalav Yisrael. It is a difference. So it's a little confusing, and that's that. Okay, let's put a circle on. The question is, what about Passover? That's going to be a whole other conversation. So maybe let's put a Passover. On Passover, we try to get chalav Yisrael, but even then, you don't need to. That's the quick answer, as long as you buy it before Passover starts. Yeah. No, you're right. Yes. So if you find kosher, now half and half, which I live on. I was just telling this to my sister. I was in Maryland this morning, and we were arguing about coffee creamer and half. And I said, you could do whatever you want with your coffee. All I know is God puts half and half in his coffee. That's heresy. No, I'm a rabbi. I can argue. No. It's okay. But as long as it has a kosher certification, it's okay. Question. So the question is in a chalav Yisrael plant, how do they actually milk it? There isn't some like rabbi, doing the milking. There's a rabbi supervising. And it's all done by machines. I've seen these things. They're amazing. It stinks. Have you ever been in these things? They reek. It smells so bad. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's me as a farmer speaking. Yeah. Okay, so again, in the way it works in the United States of America, with regular milk, the milk is all done. It's all homogenized and pasteurized. It's all on separate equipment. And it's just, again, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but it's pretty assured that you're. So again, milk, skim milk, whole milk, 2%, that kind of stuff. I think it probably does need kosher certification. I think it probably will, because now let's talk about that. Why? Because anything that's once it's processed, once it's on one, I'm pretty sure that's going to need to be for Passover. Yeah, but you can find it. I think you can. Oh, I don't know. I don't remember. So I don't know. But that's a very good question. I'm not sure. But as a general rule, the lactose-free, anything that's processed is going to need kosher certification. Okay? On that topic, let's talk about cheese first. So I was talking about milk and specifically milk. Other dairy products, cheese, whole other ball game. Why? How is cheese made? Cheese is made by fermenting the cheese. What historically throughout all of humanity, how did they ferment cheese? They would use something called rennet. What is rennet? Rennet are the enzymes. It's really from a cow's stomach. It's from the stomach of an animal. And you use the stomach, which is like a petri dish of microbes and all sorts of science experiments going on in a cow's stomach. And they would use that, and that would help ferment the cheese and turn the milk into cheese. That can actually be real basar b'chalav, can be real problems of meat and milk, which we're going to talk about. There you're talking about animal products in your cheese, in your milk, and it's a huge problem. So you can't, that's why cheese must be kosher certified. Must be kosher certified. Nowadays, don't they use a lot of enzymes and stuff and this and that?
The thing is, if it's an enzyme, it's not like you're putting more and more and more in it. It's not multiplying. So could you use the rule of 60-1?
That's the advanced question. Well, can't you use 60-1 bittul? It's just beyond the scope of this class. I'm glad you asked that. That's actually brought up in the Talmud. And it's not eligible for that rule because it's called the davar hamaimed. There are very significant limitations to when we use the laws of bittul, when things are nullified, and cheese is is not one, it's the example of where the rules of bittul, of nullification, don't work, I believe, even on a Torah level. So to make a long story short, is cheese absolutely needs kosher certification. That's going to lead us to lifestyle change number 4. So finding meat's expensive, making sure that there are no meat products or animal products in your food. The next thing, which living a kosher lifestyle is a bit of a challenge, is finding cheese. Cheese, you can't just go to a store in Wichita. You're probably going to have a hard time finding cheese, with 2 exceptions, potentially 3 or 4 exceptions. Yogurt is very easy to find, but it needs to be kosher certified, easy to find. Cream cheese, most of it's kosher, needs kosher certification, easy to find. Cottage cheese, for some reason on the West Coast, it's harder. You can still find it. It's harder to find than on the East Coast. Every cottage cheese I ever saw on the East Coast was kosher. On the West Coast, I moved out here and it's like, first of all, the cottage cheese is also weirder here. It's like thicker. I don't know. It's weird. But that's the story. So cheese needs to be kosher certified. And again, it's similar to meat. You're really, for the most part, going to need to find it in a kosher store, with the new exception of some craft string cheese. And some polio string cheese, some are kosher, some are not. It's just depending on how they ran it and how they made it. Sometimes it's kosher, sometimes it's not. You can find them in Walmarts and some other stores, and that's it. And the cheddar that Tillamook at Trader Joe's, nowhere else. The Tillamook at Trader Joe's, anywhere. But you got to find the kosher certification. And again, you go to Costco, they'll often carry kosher cheese. Okay? More cheese-related questions. Okay, so nowadays, most cheese is not necessarily made by rennet, but it needs to be kosher certified. You have to know that it isn't. I'm not sure why I can ask one of my kosher friends. I'm not sure, like every other product under the sun is kosher certified. I'm not sure why it's been such a long time for cheeses to get kosher certified. It's like not that hard. I'm not sure why it's complicated, but it absolutely must be kosher certified. But yes, you're right. Nowadays, I don't think, the expensive cheeses, they do use rennet, I believe. But for the cheaper cheeses, I don't know why, they can't just stick a mashgiach. It's not hard to certify it if they're not if something doesn't have animal products in it, if none of the ingredients are kosher sensitive, it's not that expensive, and it would seem to be worth their while to get it kosher certified. It's not that hard. So I don't know the answer, but there's obviously something holding it back. I don't know what it is. Lucerne dairy. You can find this stuff. With everything, to find kosher cheese, you just have to know where it is, and you'll be good. Okay.
I read somewhere that the udder is kosher, but what is that a problem?
The udder, Siman Tzadi Aleph 91 in Yoredea, Kichal, one of the most complex areas of halacha we're not going to talk about. It's actually very good. It actually is kosher. The problem is if you cook it, oh boy, you got yourself a problem. That's actually one of the most complex areas when you get your rabbinic ordination, and you don't want them talking about Siman Tzadi Aleph. That's hard. It's academic, but yes, and theoretically an udder is kosher. Practically, don't try that at home. Trader Joe's. You have to find, but I don't know if all of it is, but just obviously you need to find the certification on it. Okay, human milk. Human milk is not considered is kosher, even though it's not from a koshered animal. But you got to make sure it doesn't get into anything. You don't eat it. It's not good. But it actually won't make your food not kosher. Okay, but that's not for now. Okay, the Torah tells us now. So we got meat, we got cheese. Terrific. Now, with time left, let's deal with the fact that the Torah tells us, Lo savashal gedi b'chalev imo, thou shalt not cook a kid in its mother's milk. We have a tradition that, and the Torah tells us that 3 times. We have a tradition, what the Torah is teaching us. How is this in the Torah, the words of the Torah? That you'll have to come to a different class, the Sinai to You class. How do we understand the Pirish interpretation of the Torah? Not for tonight's class. We're just going to work under the assumption that the Torah is true and that the Halacha Moshe Sinai's are true and the Gemara is true. Let's just talk about what the practicalities of it are. The Torah tells us that you cannot cook a kid in milk, in its mother's milk, 3 times. The Talmud tells us there are 3 prohibitions that we learn from there. Number 1, you're not allowed to eat milk and meat together. Number 2, or let me take that back. Let me scratch that from the record. Number 1, you're not allowed to cook meat and milk together. I want to repeat that. You're not allowed to cook meat. If you cook meat and milk together and then you throw it out, you violated a Torah prohibition. There's a prohibition. If I cook non-kosher meat, if I cook pork, go cook away, that's fine. There's a prohibition even of cooking milk and meat together, number 1. Number 2, the Talmud tells us, not only is there is a prohibition of eating cooked meat and milk together. You're not allowed to eat it. So let's say someone else cooks it. Or let's say I cooked it. And now I eat it, I violated a second prohibition. Number 3, you're not even allowed to derive benefit from it. Meaning, pork, McDonald's, let's say pork, let's stick with non-kosher meat. You want to give that to your dog? No problem. As a matter of fact, people ask me all the time, Rabbi, does dog food need to be kosher? The answer is, for the most part, not. For the most part, not. Even though the food I give my dog only eats salmon, so he doesn't like any of the other stuff, or it's bad for his belly. But my old dog, we used to give him the lamb. Who cares what's in there? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the lamb wasn't kosher, wasn't slaughtered. None of that. With one exception. You can't give your dog milk and meat. Okay? You got to make sure. Now, Rabbi, does that mean my dog food needs to be kosher certified? The answer is not really. Because just look at the ingredients. This is the one area we never say look at the ingredients, right? That's never a thing we do, except when it comes to animal food. Look at the ingredients. If there's nothing dairy in that, it's good. The reason why that's true is because virtually all dog food or pet food, I don't know about cats, but cats are weird. You shouldn't be having cats. You shouldn't have cats anyway. No, I'm sorry. I just offended someone, but I'm a dog guy. What can I tell you? And I'm pretty sure it's true with cats, is they don't put dairy into this stuff, but just eyeball it just to make sure none of the ingredients have dairy in it, and that's okay. There are a few notable exceptions. I found this out the hard way a couple of years ago. Costco sells a dog treat called Milk Bone. Milk Bone. That's no good. Don't buy it. If you did buy it, try to return it. If you can't return it, give me a call. But it's virtually all dog food, at least I'm assuming it's true with cats and other animals, doesn't have milk and meat. But in theory, that would be the one exception. You can't derive benefit. It means you can't even give it to your animal. If it's got milk and meat to it together, you're not allowed to derive any benefit from it. Okay? So the Torah prohibits eating milk and meat together. So we talk about buying meat in the store, not a problem. Very easy. I don't have to worry about any of the laws of nevela, treifa. You just buy the kosher meat and you're fine. Milk, same thing. Very easy. I don't have to worry about all these details. Just buy the kosher certified milk, cheese, and you're fine. Where kashrus becomes the one area of being a kosher consumer in your own home where things become a little confusing is because you can have kosher meat, you can have kosher milk. The problem is if the two of those things crash into one another, now you've got a problem. And we have to make sure that in our houses, aside from the food that we buy, we got to make sure there's no milk and meat. The kosher certifications are making sure there's no milk and meat together. The problem is you're bringing milk into your house and bringing meat into your house, into your one kitchen. Presumably, you only have one kitchen, not 2 kitchens. So you got to make sure that we keep the two separated. Can you give me 1 second? Maybe give me 2 seconds and we'll get to you. Before we talk about, and that's really on, I don't mean to, a little bit of a tease, how to actually set up your kitchen to ensure that milk and meat aren't crashing into one another. We're really going to spend most of the next class actually talking about how to set up a kitchen to make sure that you don't get milk and meat together. Okay, that's really what we're going to talk about mostly next week. Before we get there, let's just talk about some of the other enactments. Because we got to keep milk and meat separate, Chazal, our sages, instituted as part of the laws of kosher additional restrictions because you just well imagine milk, meat, they're all over the place. You can really come to all sorts of problems. So, a couple of the prohibitions to keep in mind, classic parts of Judaism, is if you eat meat, right, and you had a good hamburger, I just had a hamburger for dinner, really good. Now, if I want to drink some milk, what do? You got to wait 6 hours. You have to wait 6 hours. The reason for that, Rambam, there's a machlokas in the halacha, or concern either it's in your teeth or somehow it's going to come up, for whatever the reasons are. But it's you've got it still in your system. Let's just leave it at that. Our sages instituted, you got to wait 6 hours.
So is that really like, you get so many arguments about, is it 4 hours, is it 6 hours, is it 8 hours, is it, like, where does all that come from? Because then
I don't know. If you're Sephardic, it's absolutely 6 hours, without a question. It's actually very stringently 6 hours, maybe even more, but we do 6 hours. Ashkenazic Jewry, it's like people heard that there are other customs because they do exist, and people are always, because 6 hours, it's a lifestyle. It's one of these other lifestyle things. Almost, if you turn back the clock 100 years ago, 98% of Ashkenazic Jewry waited 6 hours as well. 98, easily. German Jews, let me scale it back. 90%. German Jews had a tradition of 3 hours, and they still do. Dutch Jews, which is a fraction of Jewry, waited as little as a half an hour or an hour. But that was really it. But the overwhelming majority of Ashkenazic Jewry, if you come from Eastern Europe, you waited 6 hours. That's what your grandparents did. That's what your great-grandparents did. You for Sephardic, you for sure waited 6 hours. And they were much more stringent. If you're Ashkenazic, we're a little bit more chilled out with this 6 hours. For example, like I think I stopped. That's good enough. Sephardim, maybe not. But Ashkenazim, it's not like militant, but it's 6 hours. If you know what time you stopped eating, you got to wait those 6 hours. It's just a lot more stringent if you're Sephardic. So it is 6 hours. That really is the standard. There are exceptions, but I think it's coming from people who are looking for leniencies. Like, oh yeah, I like Dutch chocolate, so I'll follow the Dutch tradition. I like German beer, so I'll wait only 3 hours. So interesting, like my father-in-law, he's an absolute German Jew, like a Yaki as Yaki can be. That's what they're called, the Yaka Jews. He and growing up, he did 3 hours, but he sort of felt like we live in such a homogenized world, so he waits 6 hours, and really he should wait 3. Much to my wife's consternation, she grew up waiting 6 hours, but that's where it comes from. It's to keep the milk in it, and it really is it's a real thing. We wait 6 hours. What happens if you eat dairy and then you want to eat meat? So the halacha is you don't have to wait anything. You should wash out your mouth, either have a bite to eat or just rinse out your mouth or have a swig of water. If you had real cheese, like now there's something called hard cheese, but that doesn't exist anymore practically. If you got nice and greasy, wash your hands, wash your face, just do that. You just want to make sure but you don't need to wait between milk and meat, but from meat to milk, you got to wait 6 hours. Another restriction, of course, you may have seen, is that if I'm eating meat at my table and you want to join me with your dairy dish, you can do that, but what you have to do, so everyone says put placemats out, separate placemats. That's fine. You really want to put a hecker. You have to put something on the table to as a sign that you're meat guy, I'm dairy guy. I'm dairy guy, you're a meat guy, so that I don't accidentally munch from your thing. That's a real halacha. And this is where the tradition I've ever seen, everyone has separate, you have placemats. That's where it comes from, I think. But really, you have to put something on your table so that you make sure that I don't. Now, it's only required when you're like friends. If it's a total stranger, the concern is if it's like someone that you would actually you would share food with. If it's a total stranger and you would be socially inappropriate to snack together, so you don't need to worry about that. But that's where it comes from. A few other things that are part of these. Now, by the way, when it comes to meat and milk and these prohibitions, it's not just beef, it's also poultry. Everyone has heard that, that's only rabbinic. It is, but it's one of the most stringent rabbinic enactments. Functionally, virtually almost all scenarios, we're going to treat poultry and beef when it comes to all the laws of meat and milk, it's going to all be the same. What's the story with fish? And we saw with fish and meat, we talked about earlier, we avoid. What about fish and milk? Is that a problem? Says everyone, no? No? You sure? You sure? I'm like trapping you. I'm sorry. The answer is you're right, however. Sephardim don't eat milk and fish together. Not all Sephardim, but some, many, or most. I don't know. And it's a where it comes from is actually a point of. I mean, it's in the law. It's in the code of law. There's no question. The question is it's hard to understand where the Beis Yosef put that in there. Some argue it's a mistake, but that is actually the common practice. Most Sephardim will not eat fish and milk together, which means you're right. The most Jewish food in the world is bagels, cream cheese, and lox. You know, Sephardim won't eat that. Many Sephardim won't eat that because you got cream cheese and lox. They won't eat that. Can you imagine? Which is, again, I told one of my best friends is Sephardim. I said, a Sephardic Jew. I said, that's great. As long as you know that God is an Ashkenazi, that's fine. No, God forbid. God forbid. But that actually is a thing if you're Sephardic. But again, Ashkenazim, we don't have that concern. Question.
I have two questions.
Two questions.
One question is that if you have, let's say, meat or milk, and then you want to supplement with something artificial, like an artificial meat or an artificial milk. That's one issue. And the other thing is also sometimes nowadays you can actually grow cells, let's say, like meat from cells in petri dishes.
Gosh, yeah.
So what is it? Can you?
Let's answer those out of order. This new thing, which actually is a real thing, it's really. I don't know if it's in the market. It's like really brand new in small markets, but it's coming. It's coming. It is coming. What the answer is, I think it's still being debated. It's still being researched. I don't know the answer. So that's easy one to answer, but it's crazy what they could do. Let's talk about the first question that was asked: is what's the story with Impossible Burgers or soy milk and things like that? Let's actually go the other way. Let's talk about soy milk first. So our sages do point out that soy milk or something like that, or they used to talk about coconut milk. You can, from a kashrut perspective, it's totally fine. Cook your milk, your meat, your chicken in coconut milk. It's fine. It's not dairy. There is a rabbinic enactment that if you do that, you need to put out on the table, or somehow make it known to everyone that this was pareve. This was not actual real milk. It was coconut milk, so that people don't think that they just violated a prohibition. Now, the question is does that requirement still apply today? Maybe yes, maybe no. It's not a bad idea to tell everyone. Hey, like if where it becomes very helpful is if you are serving dinner to everyone and it's a meat dinner, and then you're inviting everyone for dessert and there's creamer out on the table. You should tell everyone this is soy creamer. It's kosher. It's pareve. It's not meat. It's not milk. That's a very smart, practical thing to do. Does the actual requirement of putting the certification on the table, is that required nowadays? Maybe yes, maybe no. If you go to most weddings, like public events, you'll see it. They will put it out. Now, having an Impossible Burger, our sages did not make any restrictions that like you can't have cheese with an Impossible. You actually can, from what I understand. Again, I've been a kosher consumer my whole life, but people say that they are almost as good as the real thing. Yeah, the Impossible Burger with the cheese on it, I've been told it's like almost as good as a real. I have never had a cheeseburger my entire life. I've been a kosher consumer my whole life, and people will tell you that these Impossible Burgers, the cheese is not as good. Is that right? The tofu, I find that stuff to be gross. But you totally can. But let's say you wanted to go the other way. You want to have a real burger and put like a fake piece of cheese on it. I don't think that's as good. It's harder, right? It's not as good. It doesn't melt. I don't know. Okay. So that's the story with that. Now, terrific. Now, here's the important thing. So you talk about cooking meat and cooking milk together. Now, let's say I just take cold milk and cold meat, or like say cheese and meat, and I crumble it together, and you eat it in the same mouthful. Technically speaking, that's definitely prohibited. Okay, that's definitely prohibited. Let's say just milk and meat bump into one another. Cold. What do? Let's say they're hot. In halacha, in Judaism, one of the most important things is tastes transfer. That's actually what cooking is I can infuse taste from milk to meat by cooking them together. If they get hot, they get cooked, steam, pour it. So things can transfer accidentally. You can transfer, I have a piece of cheese here and a piece of meat there, but they got too close. and they got heated up. Not only that, but even more importantly, is taste doesn't just transfer from one food to another food, but taste can transfer from cheese to your pot, from meat to a skillet. Food preparation items, like dishes, pots, pans, they absorb tastes. And then, so let's say you fried, a cheese omelet on a frying pan, and you clean it off really well, really well. And now I fry a hamburger in that pot. So in halacha, this is called not bar not. Don't worry what that means. It doesn't matter. We're not going to go. This stuff is incredibly complicated, but it's not relevant. The complications are never. All we need to know is to realize, and it's intuitive, the pot absorbs some of your dairy tray. If you've ever cooked, you ever speak to, and I have spoken to chefs, they season their pots. That's actually a real thing. You season a pot. Pots absolutely absorb taste. This is where kosher kitchens become complicated. This is why you have to have two sets of dishes. This is why, in theory, if you had two separate kitchens, ovens, microwaves, sinks, dishwashers, and you had one for dairy and one for milk, that would be great. The problem is if I'm going to have in many kitchens, you only have one sink. Well, there's hot water, and I'm washing the dishes, and it's splattered from my plate onto the sink, and it was a dairy plate. Now I want to wash my meat fork, and what do? Pots, pans, vessels, utensils absorb flavors. So step one is we're going to have to keep separate dishes. But step two is how do we deal with the reality of food preparation items absorb meat and or dairy? How do we live? How do you actually keep the two separate? How does a kosher kitchen, what does it look like?
Do you require two different drains because you can have...
Do I need two drains? Do I need to have two houses?
Well,
Honey, you stay there. I'll stay here just to be sure. All right. How do you do? So the answer is obviously that's not going to be realistic. So the answer is you're going to have to make, ideally, and by the way, in most industrial kosher environments, they're going to say, no. You're going to actually have separate kitchens. My yeshiva, they had a meat kitchen and a dairy kitchen. Just never the twain shall meet. Just keep it separate physically. The closer they are, the more room for error. Now, obviously, practically, in many kitchens, modern kitchens, people actually design different halves of your kitchen, and that's great. But not everyone, it's not always so practical. You're in a small apartment. You have a small kitchen. God, I don't know why. On the East Coast, you go to, not on the East Coast, in New York, the old New York kitchens, by old, I don't mean 1920s. I mean 1970s, 1980s, are tiny. They have these huge houses, and I don't know, I guess everyone in New York gets takeout. I don't know what it is. They have these tiny kitchens. And how do you operate? The answer is you can. It just requires simas lev, which means you got to pay attention. Please God, next week we'll answer all those questions. What do we do? How do we maintain? Now, okay, great. Meat and milk need to be separate. Practically, what do we do to keep our kitchens kosher? It's not that hard. It's actually doable. And here's what we'll end with this. The laws of kosher, and I've mentioned this numerous times. The laws of kashrus are incredibly complicated when things go wrong, right? That's not what this class is about. So I even mentioned a bunch of topics. Not barnat the etera, not barnat the isura, no sin tam lefkam. You don't need to know any of that stuff. Because when it comes to keeping kosher, it's not so much, the halacha, the law, we obviously need to know. But a dear relative, one of my brothers-in-law, is a very smart rabbi. He always says, when it comes to teaching kosher, you have to differentiate. There's something called, what's the laws and the nitty-gritty? That's fine. There's something called good policy. It's good policy. What's the best way to set up a kitchen, which sometimes it goes beyond the halacha. It's actually just more practical stuff. And those types of considerations, please God, we'll talk about that next week, 7:15, right here. So I want to thank you all for coming. And I guess if there are any questions, I'm here to answer and stick around.
Discuss about what you do with you have two dishwashers, you have a par of set of knives.
What do you do? Par of knives, one dishwasher, two dishwashers. Please God, we'll get there. One oven, microwaves. We'll cover it. We'll get to all of that. That'll be next year. Next week, when we're talking about the title of next week's class is the kosher kitchen. So, and I just want to, here's where I'm going to be encouraged. It's not hard. It's hard. It's not hard. You just have to do it. You just have to have, it's I call simas lev. You just have to get into a good habit. And it's not that impossible. So that'll be next week. All right, any other questions? In the back. The challah. Challah. Oh, I forgot to, someone asked what the, oh, okay, hold on. I'm not cheating over here by texting my wife. Hold on one second. What are the volume requirements for challah? Sorry, folks. I need answer ASAP if possible. When the rabbi doesn't know, what does he do? He asks his wife. So I don't know. I don't bake, but basically what you do is if it's a certain volume, I don't know, it's 5 cups, 5 pounds, something like that. If you're using that much dough, just take off a little piece. There's a bracha that you say. Assume there are 2 levels. One is if it's a certain amount, you just take off without a bracha. If it's a bigger amount, you take off with a bracha. And I'm going to tell everyone, this is what you do. There are different people have different traditions. I'm telling you, the best thing to do, put it in foil and throw it away. Put it in a Ziploc bag and throw it away. Just why did they? Because you wanted to get rid of it. And, back then they didn't have garbage. Didn't have like the guy picking up. Now we have garbage. It's just an easier way of disposing.
Why do you have to put aluminum foil? Why don't you just throw it in the garbage?
You want to throw it away respectfully. So that's why you want to wrap it in paper. That's just a more respectful way of dealing with it because it has a little bit of sanctity on it. You said the prayer and you took it off. It really was supposed to go to the Kohen. Whole other thing. That's why it's a more respectful way of disposing of it. Okay? And that's the story. Any other questions? Excellent. All right. We'll see you all next time. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you all later. Impossible verse.